I will never forget the first time I tried to meditate. It was the summer of 2002. I was 19 years old and living in Berkeley, California with my two best friends. One weekend morning, I begged them to come with me to the San Francisco Zen Center to sit zazen. When we arrived, we were guided into the meditation hall, which had several dozen cushions on the floor. And each cushion had a person sitting in silence, facing the wall. We were dispersed among the empty cushions and given the instruction to face the wall, to sit comfortably, and to lower our gaze and not think. As a young Jew from New York, this was a laughable instruction. Then they explained that any time we needed to move, even the slightest movement, we should first cup our hands together in a prayer position and offer a slight bow, then proceed with the movement. That part seemed doable. I closed my eyes, I sat down, I faced the wall. After a few seconds, maybe even like 1 second, I realized I needed to adjust my posture. So I bowed and I moved. Maybe 1 second later, I realized I had an itch on my face. So I bowed, scratched my cheek. A few seconds later, there was a hair on the corner of my forehead, and so I bowed. You get the idea. Until I started to just bow incessantly. Bow and then I could move, bow and then I could move. The combination of discomfort, shame, and incompetence led me to break out into hysterical, uncontrollable laughter in this unbelievably quiet room. And I actually got up and ran through the emergency exit. I fact-checked this story with my friend. My friend who was with me had no desire to meditate in the first place and followed me out to the street. I don't actually know how fast we were moving, but in my memory, we ran away. We cracked up laughing until we were crying. We took cover in a quiet alley where we hoped no one would find us. But what were we running from? I had, after all, voluntarily shown up to meditate. I had a handful of experiences like this in my 20s. Repeated failed attempts to try to sit still. It took me the better part of 10 years to even begin to meditate. And another 10 years to understand that I was running from the physical experience of being in my own body. Each bow was like a wake-up call, telling me that I was so uncomfortable. So uncomfortable I couldn't stand it, or as the case may be, sit in it. Most people who know that I meditate have questions about the silence. But for me, the silence is a gift. I experience the silence as a protective cloak that keeps me from causing and experience the pain of misplaced words and well-meaning pronouns. The hardest part for me has always been the experience of trying to be in the body. As a kid, I was known affectionately as the difficult child. Many of my earliest memories are of myself, mid-tantrum, feeling stuck and alone, huddled in the corner of my room, crouching between my dresser and the wall. From a very young age, I felt uncomfortable in my own skin. Most often, this manifested as an inability to get dressed. This includes the year I didn't attend, Mom, I'm so sorry. This includes the year I didn't attend my own birthday party because I couldn't decide what to wear. It is a rite of passage to sit around my family Shabbat table and have them tell you the story of the purple shorts. So the story goes, for 2 years of my childhood, I wore the same purple shorts every single day. Despite my mom taking me to every single store she could think of that sold shorts and pants, I insisted that this one pair was the only one I could wear. Nylon purple shorts, she adds. And so every night while I slept, my father would lovingly wash, dry, and fold them so they would be ready for the next day. From a young age, it was hard to feel at home in my body. And so I left my body. Perhaps you too have a story or can remember when you stopped trying to live in your body. For most of my childhood, the epithet of the difficult child followed me around and shaped how I viewed myself. Until recently, it felt like a matter of fact about myself. But over the last few years, I have felt like a hermit crab in need of a new shell to call home. A person wanting to shed a very old story I tell about myself, but unsure how. And while I had many dreams for my recent sabbatical, my honest number one priority was to get back inside my body. I had this vague sense that my emotional stuckness was actually caused by a larger disconnect I was feeling from my physical body. The pandemic had been a kind of 3-year hiatus from living in relationship to the body. I stopped exercising. I spent endless hours on Zoom, barely getting up to eat or drink, and therefore rarely even using the bathroom. I was not one of those people who took long walks in the woodlands. I was one of those people who put on a nice shirt and wore my pajamas on the bottom and hunkered down in a windowless basement office my kids referred to as tiny cold Sedek. While you all looked out at a beautifully crafted altar behind me, I was staring at a dirty chest freezer. I stored the relentless anxiety, fear, and grief of these COVID years in my body, in my muscles and my bones, without ever allowing myself to recognize them or release them. I felt like I was slowly decaying, losing touch with my own felt sense of myself. By this time last year, I actually felt estranged from my body. My lower back ached. My neck needed perpetual cracking. I wasn't sleeping well. My gut was angry. I remember thinking on Yom Kippur, I have a lot of atoning to do with my body. I remember thinking, maybe today is the day I try to reclaim it. When I told my meditation teacher about my upcoming sabbatical, she suggested I learn a martial art. I had never considered this before. Hold on. I had never considered this before, but a sabbatical seemed like the perfect time to become a beginner at something. So come January 2023, the first thing I did was spend an entire week learning about every kind of martial art. I braved the awkwardness of being new in a few different spaces until I found a place that felt just right. Maybe this is how some of you feel today. You who are new to Cold Sedek, you who are new to West Philly or Judaism, you who are searching for new routines and a sense of belonging, I really feel you. This winter, I began a new routine. I started strength training from 9 to 10 a.m. every morning after I took my kids to school. Now, the fact that I chose to join a martial arts studio is actually tangential to the main thing I want you to understand from this story. What's important about this story was that I was looking for a way to reconnect with my body. It could have been gardening or ukulele lessons or painting. There are a myriad of pathways to the body. You all offered me the incredible opportunity to take a sabbatical. Thank you. And today I want to offer you an insight that this time gifted me. Now, in addition to strength training, another highlight of my sabbatical was the opportunity to coach Little League. Now, mind you, despite playing team sports my entire childhood, I've actually never before played baseball. Everything I know and love about baseball, I've learned from my kids. This spring, after 7 years of spending Shabbat mornings here in the Calvary Center, I spent every Saturday morning in the inner sanctum of a dugout, coaching a gaggle of 7 and 8-year-olds. It was only fitting, given that the game of baseball is my children's primary spiritual practice. Now, for those of you who were here on Erev Rosh Hashanah, this next story may sound familiar. One crisp night, I was leading a circle of 7-year-olds in some simple stretches, and I invited them to reach for the sky, and all their hands went flying up. And then I said, reach for the ground, and they all bent over to touch the grass. And as I said that, I reached down, and to my great surprise, I touched my toes. I was so shocked that I laughed out loud mid-stretch. I couldn't believe it. I had never before bent over and touched the ground. I hung there mid-stretch, and I felt like crying. My hamstrings were like, for 40 years we've been holding it together here. We can finally let go. Havaya has reached, and so can we. As this insight arose in my body, a light bulb went off. Flexibility is not the result of stretching. It is the result of strengthening. We don't need to contort our hearts and our minds in order to change. We don't need to extend beyond our reach. To make change, we need to build power, slowly and steadily over time. First in our own bodies, and then in our collective body, our communities, our movements for justice. In his book, My Grandmother's Hands, Resma Menachem explains, our bodies have a form of knowledge that is different from our cognitive brains. The body is where we fear, hope, and react, where we constrict and release, where we fight, flight, and freeze. If we want to change, if we want to do teshuvah, if we want to begin to upend white supremacy, Menachem is clear. We must begin with our bodies. Now, lest you think the point of this story is that I became more flexible, it's not. What matters is that I came to understand something about myself, about my life, about my own spiritual and emotional growth from the body directly. This feels risky to share, knowing how different all our bodies are and how complex our relationships to our bodies are. I never would want to suggest that you need to meditate or go to the gym 5 days a week or coach Little League to get in touch with your body. But I am suggesting it is worthwhile for each of us to deepen our awareness and our connection to our bodies as they are, not as we might wish them to be. I imagine this may be hard to hear and even harder to act on. People who talk about embodiment often make it sound like great fun. It's not. In reality, most of us have an ambivalent or negative relationship with our bodies for very real reasons. Very few people I know look in the mirror and see their bodies as a reflection of the divine. Talking about our bodies is uncomfortable for so many reasons. It is uncomfortable because our bodies are uncomfortable. the experience of being in the body can be bitter. The body is a site of pain, disability, dysphoria, trauma, oppression, aging, illness, and disappointment. Many of us experience the body as having failed us, or perhaps failing us right now. But I know the healing power of bitter herbs, horseradish and romaine, black radish and dandelion root. And I'm suggesting it is both worthwhile and necessary to be with this bitter truth and to approach the body as a source of tshuva and healing. I am ever inspired by the teachings of Rabbi Julia Watts-Belzer, whose brand new book about disability wisdom invites every one of us to love our own bones and to know ourselves whole. Now, when I talk about bodies, I'm not talking only about able-bodied, white, cis, normative bodies. I'm striving to recognize and celebrate all of us, our varied, myriad bodies. Which leads me to another reason why this may be deeply uncomfortable to talk about. Throughout history, many of us have been taught not to take pride in our Jewish bodies. We've been told that we are weak, we are hairy, we are too big, we are not big enough, we are too loud, we are too fey. Across generations and diasporas, many of us have inherited trauma that spans millennia and have stored it in our DNA. It has wrought havoc on our nervous systems and our digestive systems. If you can't cry about it, you gotta laugh about it. For these reasons and more, we may relate to our minds as a refuge from the discomforts of the body. We have, after all, learned to collectively define ourselves as the people of the book. We are word nerds. We are intellectually engaged. We are critical thinkers. This has been an important Jewish survival strategy. And I am by no means suggesting we stop reading and writing and debating, but I am suggesting that there is another aspect of Jewish spiritual practice that has been underappreciated and often neglected, which is in part why we are here today as we are. Yom Kippur is on the one hand about who we are as people, in our hearts and in our souls. We do cheshbon hanefesh. We take an account of ourselves. We say vidui, acknowledging and articulating in words the ways we have missed the mark. But on the other hand, Yom Kippur is a very embodied spiritual practice. Our observance is marked by our collective refraining from work, the same work that is prohibited on Shabbat, plus 5 additional prohibitions. We are instructed to fast from food and water, to abstain from bathing, to abstain from sexual conduct. We refrain from anointing ourselves with oil. We are not supposed to smell good today. We don't wear leather or adorn the body in comfort or beauty. As it turns out, these 5 rabbinic prohibitions all relate to the body directly. These instructions seem to suggest that what is unique and specific to Yom Kippur is first and foremost about the body. Now, we just read the Torah reading where the original instructions for Yom Kippur come from. And nowhere listed in our Masor, or in the scroll itself, were the 5 core prohibitions of Yom Kippur. The Torah actually only instructs us to do one thing, and it told us to do it twice. It says in Leviticus 16, Ta'anu et nafshotechem. You should afflict your soul. Or in the translation of our Machzor, you shall practice self-denial. You should feel a kind of spiritual constriction known as inui nefesh. In the Torah, there is no mention of the body as it relates to Yom Kippur. But 2,000 years ago, much like today, the rabbis have the same question that I have. What does it mean to afflict my soul? How do I do that? And the rabbis realized that the only way they could make sense of this instruction was to make it visceral, to make it about the body. They say, Ta'anu et nafshotechem? Oh yeah, that means 5 things. Don't drink, don't eat, don't bathe, don't have sex, don't anoint, don't wear leather. 6 fingers, because drink and eat go together. Fast forward 2,000 years. We should feel the full permission of our Reconstructionist Jewish inheritance. We should reimagine our relationship to these instructions, which were themselves interpretations, to take notice of the habits of minds that are constricting you and to fast from them. We each have a very different relationship to our body and to the instructions to fast from food and water and pleasure. We who are survivors of eating disorders, sexual abuse and sexual assault. We who are pregnant or nursing. We who are diabetic or disabled or on medication that requires eating. As someone who has known intimately the dangers of eating disorders, more than a fast from food or water, what I encourage for you this Yom Kippur is a fast from words and a fast from self-judgment. We are meant to feel constriction, but not to cause harm to ourselves. When any of these restrictions cause us harm, the rabbis actually forbid us to observe them. Instead, we are invited to be as spiritually brave as the rabbis and to reinvent these 5 things, just like they did. So for years, I have been taking the concrete embodied practices of Yom Kippur, and I've been encouraging all of us to understand them as metaphors. But this year, I realized something new. I realized these 5 prohibitions actually began as metaphor. The rabbis took something metaphysical and they made it physical. They did this because they understood that spiritual transformation requires the body. However counterintuitive it may be, if we want to change our mental and emotional habits, if we want to participate in the work of tshuva, we must return to the body itself. This morning we sang the words of Nishmat Kol Chai. We sing these meditative words not just on Shabbat Shabbaton, but every single Shabbat of the year. Nishmat Kol Chai is an ancient poem that calls our awareness to every aspect of our bodies, to every limb and sinew, to the pathway of the breath, to the fingers and the toes. According to the mystics, we sing this piyut for the explicit purpose of unifying the mind and the body so that we can bridge the gap between this world, Olam Hazeh, and the world to come, Olam Haba. Which is to say, increasing our body awareness actually brings about Olam Haba in this world. Quoting from the piyut, the limbs that you gave us, the spirit that you breathed into our nostrils, and the tongue you placed into our mouths. Every heart shall be awestruck. Every organ within shall resonate with your name. As the psalmist sings in Psalm 35, Kol atzmotai tomarna, all of my bones shall say, Adonai, mi chamocha, Holy One, who is like you? What might it mean to look for God with every bone in our body? What might it mean for us to develop this kind of body awareness? Nishmat Kol Chai continues, Barchi nafshi et Adonai, let my whole life force bless the One. V'chol kravai et Shem Kodshi, and everything within me shall orient towards God's holy name. These closing words point us to the realization that we might come to know God from the inside out. We may not be able to think our way to a theology, but we might be able to feel our way there. As a trans person, this resonates deeply. Everything I know to be true about myself, I've learned from the inside out. From learning to breathe, from becoming aware of my body, from listening to its insights. I think deep down, somewhere unconscious within me, I began to meditate all those years ago because I knew that in order to become myself, to know myself whole, I was going to have to learn how to live in a conscious relationship with this physical body, and I knew no other way how. As someone who has run away from this truth literally and figuratively, I know how hard it is to begin this work, or to turn back to it over and over again, to return to it as a spiritual practice. I know there is some amount of randomness that creates the necessary conditions to heal in this way, and I also know there are some very practical things that can help. When I reflect on it, the common thread between each of my core spiritual practices is that they help me connect first to my breath and then to my body. Learning to become aware and allow for the pain and the discomfort of the physical body is actually how I am learning to become aware and allow for difficult emotions. It happens in the body first. These spiritual practices have gifted me an insightful understanding of my own self. They have given me access to a kind of knowing that is inseparable from my being and from my body, a kind of wisdom that emerges v'chol atzmotai tomarnu, when all of our bones are speaking to us directly. When faced with profound ambivalence about huge life decisions, my mind turns to chaos. It is then that I return to prayer and meditation, to exercise and to the breath, to the body itself, to access clarity about what I need and want most. Embodied practices have taught me the difference between knowing something and having insight, what in Judaism we might call da'at, and we pray for it every day in our Amidah. Da'at is when we knowing something, we feel a rush to write it down, lest we forget it. But da'at, insight, it arises with a kind of bone-deep clarity that can never be forgotten. Every insight I have learned on the cushion stays with me front and center. Perhaps this is why, upon receiving the Torah at Sinai, the Israelites responded, Na'aseh v'nishma. We will do these things. We will come to embody them, and only then might we understand them. I think embodiment is a primary purpose of all spiritual practices, including prayer, which is why the words of Nishmat Kol Chai call us to connect to the body through prayer. But this is not just about prayer. This is about mitzvot more generally. This is about the entirety of Jewish spiritual practice. If we allow ourselves to zoom out, we can see Jewish spiritual life is centered around the body. The sensuous foods of our people, babka and brisket, bizcochos and bimuelos, not to make you mouth water at this moment. The annual tradition of building and dwelling in a sukkah, the wrapping of talitot and the laying of tefillin. regular immersions in the living waters of the mikveh, the blessings we're invited to say before and after we eat. We even bless the experience of using the bathroom, that all the openings shall remain open and all the closings shall remain closed. Amen. That is what it is to know wonder in the body. Not to mention the bathhouse. In fact, the Talmud declares it forbidden for a scholar to reside in a city which did not contain a public bathhouse. Which is to say, we cannot live in a place where we cannot care for our bodies. A story is told of Hillel the elder. He had just finished teaching, and he was walking away, and his students followed after him. "Rabbi, Rabbi, where are you going?" "To fulfill a mitzvah," he replied. Ever curious, his students kept after him. "What mitzvah?" they asked. To which he replied, "I'm going to wash in the bathhouse." He explained, just as there are people that scour and wash the statues of the kings of flesh and blood, so too we humans, created in the image of the Holy One, must care for and wash our bodies. To care for the body, to wash at the bathhouse, says Hillel, is a mitzvah. Hillel's students seemed shocked. Maybe you are too. Nothing about our society reflects this truth. The primary images we have of the body in society are fraught with judgment. But during my sabbatical, I came to understand on a body level what it might mean to encounter the body as an altar, not in an idolatrous way, but in a sacred way. For the last 10 days, we have been blessed with so many different dreams that our community holds of the world to come. They are as varied as the rabbinic traditions of Olam Haba itself. In some of the rabbinic visions, we are bodiless beings. The Talmud describes the world to come is not at all like this world. In the world to come, there is no eating, no drinking, no procreation, no commerce, no envy, no hatred, no rivalry. And the righteous sit with their crowns on their heads, and they enjoy the radiance of the Shekhinah. One big bodiless enlightenment. But in other visions of Olam Haba, it is described as a feast, a banquet hall, a deeply sensual and embodied eternal existence where every pleasure is readily met. Now, despite the varied rabbinic opinions about whether or not we have a body in the world to come, and despite which one we long for, we undoubtedly have a body in this world. And it has a lot to teach us about the change and transformation we seek in our own lives. Excuse me. It has a lot to teach us about the change and transformation we seek as a community. And it has a lot to teach us about the change and transformation we need in our world. We are called to make tshuva with every bone in our body. It may be hard. You may encounter very real inner resistance. You may be thinking, there must be some other way. Show me to the emergency exit. But I am here to remind you that the wisdom of your own body is very close to you. It's literally in your mouth. It's in your heart. Lo b'shamayim hi. It is not in the heavens. You can do this. It's there for you. This is an invitation to make tshuva with ourselves. That this be the year that we come home to our bodies. That we listen to them. That we learn from them. That we grow less afraid of them. That we come to experience ourselves as whole. That we have the courage to know with every bone and every cell that we don't need to change or improve our bodies. We need only connect, understand, and honor them. To quote one of my teachers, Tania Isaac, who is herself a mother, a dancer, and a person living with chronic illness, body journeys are so individual, and they are each valid for what they bring to us. So I invite you to begin where you feel most called. To make a practice of feeling your fingers in the dirt as you garden, to notice the weight of your belly as you bow at Aleinu, to grip the hand of your cane or your crutch and feel its firmness, to feel thirst and hunger and fullness, to bless each drink of water and each bite of food, to appreciate the smooth texture of the keys of a piano or the clink of mahjong tiles as you discard, to savor the smell of fried garlic and roasted onions. I know how tender and how personal this topic is. So I want to say, for any ways that I may have missed my mark in my words today, I ask your forgiveness. If your journey is anything like mine, it will include many false starts. It will include the irrepressible urge to run away. And it will include the ineffable call to return to the body again and again. May this be the year that we deepen our relationships to our physical bodies. May this be the year we understand our bodies as a bridge between Olam Hazeh and Olam Haba. And may this be the year we have the courage to know ourselves as whole. Shana Tova.
Nishmat kol chai Tevarech et Shimcha Adonai Eloheinu Nishmat kol chai Tevarech et Shimcha Adonai Eloheinu Yananai Nishmat kol chai Tevarech et Shimcha Adonai Eloheinu Nishmat kol chai Tevarech et Shimcha Adonai Eloheinu Yananai
We continue now with the Musaf service. It begins on page 579, and I invite you to rise in body or spirit